Hey guys, Trey here. I wanted to do a forecast discussion today on the potential for severe weather upcoming over the weekend and into early next week. As you can see here, the SPC convective outlooks are pretty colorful starting today, but more so focused in the northern plains tomorrow and Sunday. And as we get into early next week, we'll have a risk, it appears, as well. So wanted to do a kind of off-the-cuff sort of forecast discussion where we look at everything, assess the setup, because there are some concerns. Even though we had been pretty gung-ho on this setup for the last couple days, there are some concerns, so wanted to go over those and wanted to play out the various scenarios that we might see, particularly for Saturday and Sunday. Not really going to focus on today. There is not much of a tornado threat today at all, just your classic kind of high plains storms up in the Montana, Wyoming, Western Dakotas. Then you have an area that will likely see storms with large hail and damaging winds out here in sort of the kind of northern part of Dixie Alley, northern Louisiana, northern Mississippi, northern Alabama into Tennessee, and into southern Missouri. But not going to focus on today too much. Going to focus particularly on Saturday and Sunday, and we'll take a look at Monday and maybe even Tuesday as well. So let's get started with Saturday. This is the risk right now from the SPC, the Day 2 outlook, an enhanced risk out in the western half of South Dakota, surrounded by a slight risk that goes all the way up to the Canadian-U.S. border, up in Montana and North Dakota, and then down into extreme northeast Colorado and the northwest quadrant of Nebraska, with a marginal risk surrounding that. 5% tornado threat in western South Dakota. 30 hatched wind, that's the reason for the enhanced out in western South Dakota, and a 15 hatched hail in kind of the same area. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the broad picture. Here's our satellite image, and you can see our trough, some evidence of a trough here off the coast of Southern California. Lots of low cloudiness out here. It's kind of blocked. Let's see if I can get the goes west sector. Doesn't look like I can, so we're going to have to go with the continental sector here. But you can see kind of a swirl out here off the Southern California coast, and if we look at water vapor, it's even more well defined, and you can see the incredible amount of divergence aloft, or diffluence aloft, where these winds sort of spread apart here. You can see winds over Arizona going like that, winds over California going like that. So incredible divergence there aloft over the Great Basin area. And our trough is sitting just offshore. Let's look at our upper air maps to confirm, and we see big sort of closed low out there off the Southern California coast with this pretty strong jet max rotating around it. That's going to be our weather maker across the northern plains this weekend. That is going to eject to the northeast. This ridge is so strong here across the southern plains that this trough is going to have nowhere to go but to the north and east, up and over it. So the western portion of the ridge might break down a little bit, but it's gonna remain intact pretty much. So this trough is going to go up and over it and eject into the northern plains tomorrow and Sunday. Then it's kind of just going to sit there. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. So as we get this to move off tomorrow into Sunday, we'll see what our moisture looks like. We would expect at least some sort of cyclogenesis with such strong flow traversing the Rockies. So let's see if we have any moisture waiting in the wings to get pulled up. Here's Oklahoma, Kansas, and we'll zoom in a little bit. We see we have pretty decent moisture waiting across the southern plains. 70s dew points in North Texas, southern Oklahoma. Still mid to upper 60s here across western or eastern Nebraska and eastern Kansas, with even a 71-degree dew point there at Salina, Kansas. So moisture definitely waiting in the wings here to the east and southeast. If we go to our northern plains sector, we have pretty marginal dew points at this point. The western half of Nebraska into South Dakota, mid to upper 50s across much of the area, with a stretch of 40s dew points here in northeast Wyoming, into Montana and North Dakota. So we're going to need some moisture transport from the east and southeast. Will we get that? Again, as this trough sort of traverses into the plains, we should get some sort of cyclogenesis up in here, I would imagine, up in the northern plains, and that should back winds in the low levels and allow moisture to stream northward. Let's take a look. We'll take a look at the models for that in a second. Here's our upper air pattern. Let's take a look at our 850 millibar pattern. We see a pretty quiet pattern overall, a little blob of maybe a low-level jet out of the northwest up there in northeast North Dakota, northwest Minnesota. A little bit of a blob down here as well. Not sure if that has anything to do with storms last night or anything, but it's a very small blob of that. Let's look at how deep our moisture is. So here we are at OUN, which is Norman, Oklahoma this morning. 62 dew point this morning. And we see we don't have a very large moist layer. It's decently dry above that, although not extremely dry. But we're not seeing our temperature line and our dew point line close together for very high off the surface. So it's not particularly great moisture quality out there. Let's look at where we had some of our higher dew points. We saw Salina was 71 degrees. Here is Topeka, Kansas, and you can see large inversion there, pretty dry just off the surface above that very strong inversion layer near the surface. But we do have lots of upper level moisture, so that should bode well for us. Let's look at Omaha, kind of the same thing out there, some upper level moisture, not quite so great moisture in the low level, so definitely a concern here as we go into tomorrow that our moisture quality is not quite that great. And let's look farther southeast maybe, and there we go. Springfield, Missouri. We have a little bit of a deeper kind of moist layer there. There's some quirks in that, definitely, but definitely a deeper moist layer there. In Springfield, here's Little Rock, definitely the same thing. So our deeper moisture, look at that moist layer, up to 700 millibars almost. That's pretty incredible. So our deeper moisture is residing over the very eastern portion of the southern plains and probably into the trees there in Missouri and Arkansas and areas to the south and southeast. So there's gonna have to be some work done on this moisture to get it up to the north, and it's not inconceivable. If we do get some sort of cyclogenesis today, which is in question, I would expect that to start to move northward as surface winds back across the plains. But that's a pretty long way to go. We got to get this all the way up into South Dakota, Nebraska, North Dakota for Saturday. That's kind of far to go, this deeper moisture, but we'll see what the models have to say here. Let's take a look at the NAM, 12Z NAM, hot off the press today. So here's our 500 millibar plot. So you can see our close low with strong jet streak there off the southern California coast. That begins to move inland today. It's just been sitting there over the past few days. That is going to move onshore today across Arizona. Wouldn't be surprised if there's moisture down here that we get some severe storms back where I'm from in Arizona and up into the Las Vegas area and southern Utah. But as we move into Saturday, we see that trough ejecting, riding over the ridge. That western portion of the ridge starts to break down a little bit, and then we get that strong jet streak to head into the northern plains. Now, you might say, oh, well, flow is pretty meridional here at 500. That's not what we like to see. Well, this tends to work out, and we'll see with how backed our low-level flow is that this shouldn't really be an issue. So we have strong forcing here across the northern plains. Let's see if we do get a surface or low-level response. Here's our 850s. And wow, look at that. We get even late Friday night, early Saturday morning, we get a very significant response here in our low-level jet. And it is backed nicely out of the southeast and even east up here in Canada. So that is promising. As we go into the day Saturday, that kind of sticks around. We get very strong low-level jet, although Our strongest 500 millibar flow might be displaced slightly from the low-level jet. The low-level jet might be a little bit east of our favored area based on our 500 millibar map, but that's nitpicking a little bit right now. We'll take a closer look at that here in a sec. But let's look at our 850 theta E. This is a measure. It takes into account, it's a temperature measure, but it takes into account the moisture quantity in the atmosphere. So this would be considered low-level moisture here at 850, and we see we have a very, very juicy air mass here across the northern plains. When you get into the pink here, in your theta E values, even into the dark red here, that's a very juicy air mass, and we do see we have a very juicy air mass up here across much of the plains, specifically here into South Dakota and Nebraska. Let's go down to the surface, see if we get a surface low, a surface reflection here. And we see once we get that big kind of troughiness here, we get kind of this broad area of surface low that is just pretty big here. The pretty big surface low response here across the Rockies. And then we kind of get that consolidation here in the northern plains over Montana. That should draw moisture northward. Will it be enough though? There seems to be very warm temperatures here. First off, what we note here, let me zoom in here across the central plains. Okay, so Nebraska here, South Dakota here, Wyoming. Very warm temperatures here across the plains here. Into southwest South Dakota, temperatures are getting into the upper 90s. And even warmer down here as you go to the south, 100 degrees there in southern Nebraska. So very warm temperatures out here in the warm sector. Let's look at our moisture quality though, our moisture content. So this kind of matches what we're seeing now with our surface chart. The best moisture is definitely out here in the southeast. As we go on through the day, we get a little bit of a response late Friday night, early Saturday morning as that kind of big, broad cyclonic flow at the surface starts to take shape. And then during the day Saturday, we really get that advection. But it's very, very narrow. That is a concern for sure. That is definitely a concern. It's just a very narrow ribbon of moisture. That is definitely concerning. That's not what we like to see. We like to see kind of a broad fetch of moisture. Still, any storms that go into this environment should be pretty well capable of producing supercell hazards and supercell characteristics based on the wind profiles. We'll take a look at the wind profiles and some forecast soundings in a second. But we had southwesterly flow at 500, backing to almost east-southeasterly at the surface. So hodograph should be pretty large and looping here. We'll take a look in a second, but this just narrow moisture tongue is pretty bad. So what I think is going to happen here, once we get that trough to go here, to traverse here into the northern plains, eastern Wyoming, western Nebraska, western South Dakota, what should happen is on the higher terrain out here, here's a topographical map of South Dakota. Here's the Black Hills, Rapid City. We have higher terrain out here to the west. What's going to happen is I believe storms will start to form here into Wyoming and along the Black Hills. I think it's plausible we get storms to go on the Black Hills, and these would have to be the ones to watch. The ones here that form just to the west of Rapid City, right here in the Black Hills, because they are closest to the low-level jet, closest to this moisture source. Stuff probably will form out here in the mountains of Wyoming, but look at the just marginal moisture out here. That's not a good thing at all. Storms will be very high base. We're going to have something go here and move into this this sort of tongue of moisture, which is definitely plausible by late afternoon and evening. But we're going to have to be patient here. If you're up there chasing, you're going to have to be patient and hope a storm fires here on the Black Hills, which I think it should. With that amount of forcing aloft and the terrain influences, there should be a storm here or two that form on the Black Hills. Let's take a closer look at our low-level jet. We saw it was kind of displaced from our region of best upper-level flow. Here's the 500 chart. Here it is at 21Z. It's actually not that bad. There's flow here over that area we were talking about just now. That should be enough to get storms to go on the higher terrain. Let's look where our low-level jet is here. This is at 21Z Saturday, so this would be 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And we see there's a little bit of a weakness in the low-level jet out here. Whether that's a model thing or an actual thing, we'll have to take a look at. I wouldn't put too much stock into it right now, but it's something to keep in mind that our low-level jet is a little bit farther east than we might have wanted. This looks like it might be convectively enhanced, especially given the direction. It's out of the west. I don't think that is going to be a legitimate low-level jet, legitimate portion of the low-level jet. That'll be partly due to convection. But our best low-level jet is out here. So if we can get storms to move into this region where our better moisture is as well, they should, and assuming they're discrete, which we'll talk about in a second here, storm mode, they should be producing potentially significant severe hazards. Let's take a look at some forecast soundings here from our moisture tongue. This is kind of at the interface between the 500 millibar, the best 500 millibar flow, and the best 850 millibar flow. You can see now that sounding we have convection ongoing there, so that could be something to watch. Let's take a look at 21Z. This should be fairly representative of the pre-convective environment. And you can see we have very large instability, a little bit of a capping inversion left. Spreads are not too bad up here. This is kind of on the nose of that warmer air, that heating axis, 86 over 71. So spreads are pretty good. Lots of instability, steep lapse rates aloft, a little bit of inhibition here left. So that is going to have to break here if we want storms, and the higher terrain might help with that. The Black Hills might help with that. And our hodographs look very, very good. Large and looping like we thought we would see. Strong east-southeasterly surface winds veering to southwesterly aloft. Large looping hodographs. So if we can get storms to go in this environment, they should be capable of producing large hail, potentially significant hail, and potentially tornadoes. That is definitely a tornado hodograph if we can get things to fire, and that's insane. So this is at 0Z. There's a little bit of convective contamination here, but not too bad at all. Just look at that hodograph. That is an absolutely insane hodograph. 700, almost 800 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. That is just insane right there. But there's a little bit of sin that starts to build in, a little bit of inhibition that starts to build in here towards 0Z. So that'll be something to watch for Saturday. If any storms can go and remain discrete in this environment, they will be capable of producing large hail, steep lapse rates aloft, likely damaging winds as these strong winds in the mid-levels get transported downward through downdrafts. And this would be indicative of strong to potentially violent tornadoes. This parameter space is one that we've seen before up here in South Dakota and Nebraska on days like the Manchester Day of 2003, Battle Day of 2010, the Pilger Day 2014. This parameter space is pretty rare for this region. So if any discrete storms can form, if we can, this very well could be a NAM issue. It always tends to be biased a little bit strongly as far as the cap goes. If we can get discrete storms in this environment, in this moisture tongue, by 0Z, they would be capable of producing all severe hazards, including strong to significant tornadoes. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Storm mode is going to be critical. Let's take a look at storm mode. So we would take a look at where our initiating boundaries are. Where is our initiating boundary? Let's see. So this is at 21Z. Here's kind of our surface low. You could probably call this a warm front. This would probably be our warm front, and this would likely be our initiating boundary. Of course, we would get storms over the higher terrain, but this boundary might provide some extra forcing, kind of at this triple point here between this sort of, I guess you could call it maybe a Pacific front. I would be hesitant to do so, though. It doesn't really move that far and act like a Pacific front. But if we take a look at our warm front, and this is kind of difficult because it's not really your classic situation. So let's assume that yeah, this is going to be tough. We don't really have an initiating boundary because I would expect storms to form on the higher terrain out here. So we don't really have that classic dry line or sort of cold front scenario. If we were to take this as our initiating boundary, because we do have some convergence along it, we could take this as our initiating boundary here, whatever this is, this sort of pseudo sort of front. We could say for simplicity's sake, basically north-south. Let's look at our bulk shear vectors here. This is at 21Z again. And our bulk shear vectors pretty much southerly. So storm motion should be toward the north, northeast. And with a north-south oriented boundary, that would be indicative of more of a linear mode. So that is something to watch. And if we get storms down in this region where the surface temperatures are higher, that would promote higher temperature dew point spreads and therefore a more significant production of outflow with these storms. That would allow them to potentially congeal faster. So that's something to watch. That's something we can assess a little bit better, I think, tomorrow morning. But signs, at least initial signs, point to maybe a more linear mode if these storms that move off, because the storms that form on the higher terrain out here are going to be outflow dominant pretty much from the get-go, because dew points out here only in the low to mid 50s at best. Temperatures fairly warm out here, especially near the Black Hills. So initially they'll be outflow dominant. Can they recover as they move into the better air mass, and will they be discrete as they move into that better air mass? We'll see. Let's now take a look at Sunday. So Saturday, definitely, I think, something to watch. If we can get storms to be discrete in that sort of moisture tongue by early evening, all severe hazards possible, including the threat for strong tornadoes. Sunday is going to be kind of a similar day, but we'll have better moisture quality for sure. So this is now Sunday, so we see that trough, the initial piece of energy eject, but then our more broad scale synoptic trough sticks around, and we have another sort of piece of energy, another sort of shortwave out in here, enhanced flow up here across the Dakotas that will help fire storms on Sunday. Would expect our low-level jet to stick around with that sort of broad cyclonic flow at the surface that kind of tightened up as we saw on Sunday. Here's our low-level jet on Monday. It is very strong up in here. Would think definitely it very much a ramp up here after dark. So right just from that, eastern South Dakota would definitely be, the eastern half of South Dakota looks to be under the gun for Sunday. Let's take a look, see if we have any forcing. We'll see if we have any short waves here to kind of propel storms to get going. Let's take a look at the Northern Plains sector here. And we definitely, that's Saturday, here's Sunday. Definitely could see a little bit of a kink in the flow there by Monday evening right in here. So that should help. A little bit of a belt of enhanced 700s here. So right now, just from this NAM output, again, it's just one model. I'm doing that for simplicity, and it's one of the better short-range models. Definitely would think eastern half of South Dakota will be under the gun for Sunday. Let's take a look at moisture as well. So we have that tongue of moisture there, and then we get a much better transport of moisture into Sunday afternoon across the Dakotas. Now this moisture is a little bit displaced to the north of where our best low-level jet is, our 700 millibar shortwave is. We do have a little bit that extends down here into northern South Dakota. So we'll take a look at that. And this is definitely a good sounding in hodograph for severe weather. Again, once again, steep lapse rates aloft. So large hail would be a concern. The hodograph is definitely adequate for tornadoes. Definitely looping enough for tornadoes. Let's take a look up here in North Dakota, where the best moisture is. See if we have anything better there. And that's a little bit better up there. And it does show stronger flow in the low levels here at about 850 here. So that is going to be something to watch. This would definitely be conducive of tornadoes, potentially some strong with this parameter space. Very large CAPE, almost 5,000 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE. Our 0 to 3 CAPE, very important in tornado genesis. It's been discussed and discovered. 3 CAPE definitely more than adequate for that in that regard to stretch those sort of horizontal convective rolls into the vertical to become tornadoes. And this hodograph, the wind profile definitely is indicative of tornadoes, potentially some strong with that much instability. So Sunday definitely something to watch, and this is more of a classic sort of pattern. We get a very strong surface low here Sunday. Let me go to the Central Plains sector so you can see it a little bit better. Yeah, so we have a pretty strong surface low here. Our warm front is located somewhere up in here along the South Dakota-North Dakota border. So I would definitely keep an eye on that region for severe weather, potentially tornadic supercells as we go into Sunday. As we go into Monday, it becomes a little bit more unclear. There's a little bit more discrepancy in things. Let's go ahead and zoom out here. So there's our trough. And we get flow to stick around on Monday. With this, if this comes to fruition, I would expect the best stuff to be in Canada. Definitely would not rule out stuff down here in the plains, though, if we get some short waves to move through. Let's take a look at our surface pattern here, see how that evolves. So there's Sunday, and one thing to note, you can see Tropical Storm Cristobal here down, making landfall probably sometime Monday morning, potentially late Sunday night to Monday morning. And so there's a very significant surface low there in eastern Colorado. Let's go ahead and zoom in on that. So this is Monday afternoon. That is a classic position for severe weather if we can get good moisture up in there. And we do. Very, very well-defined dry line out there. Very well-defined triple point here. Here's our warm front. Dry line. Let's go ahead and look out here. Let's look right on that triple point there. That's at 21Z. We'll look at 0Z here. And there's some convection ongoing on that triple point. So let's go ahead and look again at 21Z, our pre-convective environment. If it ever loads. While we're waiting for that, we can see if we have a low-level jet. I would expect there to be a low-level jet response from this as well, just because of the flow traversing the Rockies. And we do have a little bit across this region here. Definitely a little bit of a low-level jet response. And so we have 35, 40, 45 knots up here in northwest Kansas, southwest Nebraska. So that should promote discrete storms if we look at our shear vector. So our dry line there, pretty much north-south. If we look, yeah, there's our shear vectors, pretty much orthogonal to the boundary. So would expect discrete storms there on Monday if we can get storms to fire, which we should. Looks like there's a little bit of a shortwave there, so that should be perfect. I'm definitely liking Monday a lot now after looking at this run. Of course, it's the 84-hour NAM. You can never really trust the 84-hour NAM, but definitely something to watch in parts of northwest Kansas, maybe northeast Colorado, southwest Nebraska. Very strong surface low, decent low-level jet, some forcing, so definitely have to keep that in mind. Let's take a look at that sounding we pulled. Unable to generate sounding. 4-point requested. So let's try that again. This is just south of those storms. Hopefully this one will not be convectively contaminated. Here, this will take one from 21Z as well, just before storms fire. Looks like COD might be having trouble with their soundings here. Nope, so this is at 21Z. Long, straight photographs. 88/65, so spreads are a little bit high, but it's the northern plains, so you never know with those. Definitely some good instability, 3000 mixed layer cape, steep lapse rates aloft. With this, would expect probably splitting supercells, at least initially, with a large hail threat. Here's at 0Z. That is not correct. Let's take a look. Let's try one just ahead of those storms. Hopefully it won't be contaminated, but this definitely indicative of large hail. Of course, it's the high plains. Probably could squeak out a tornado. We'll see if wind profiles get better as the evening goes on. That's still not correct. That's still at Sunday. So COD having some trouble with their soundings here. We'll try one more time just to the south of those storms. Yeah, they're having trouble with soundings here. But that would be an environment with low-level jet increasing toward dark. Would expect the photographs to ramp up toward dark as well. For any discrete storms that would fire, would expect large hail to be the main threat, although a tornado or two could not be ruled out for sure. So a good stretch of chase days upcoming for parts of the northern and central plains. Definitely think tomorrow, Saturday, is a little bit up in the air. We'll have to see tomorrow how that moisture gets in there, but I think any discrete storms tomorrow in that environment that can tap into that moisture and the low-level jet will have a potential to produce large hail and the chance for tornadoes, some of which could be strong. Sunday, more of the same. I think up in northeast South Dakota, southeast North Dakota, more of the same. Definitely could see a tornado threat there as well. Large hail, again, a threat up there. And damaging winds as storms transport the stronger flow down to the surface through downdrafts, and if storms congeal, there would definitely be a damaging wind threat with that line. Monday, a day to watch as well here, farther south across the central plains, northwest Kansas, southwest Nebraska area. Definitely looks like a classic severe weather setup there, so we'll have to watch that as the weekend progresses. So a little bit longer discussion today. Thanks for sticking in with me. One thing we did not do was look at the cams for tomorrow. Let's look at the cams for tomorrow, actually, Saturday. We'll go to the Central Plains just to see what they say. This is the 12Z HRRR model. And you see early on, storms off the mountains here. That is not ideal, and you see they quickly go into a line. That's just indicative of they're forming in the worst moisture out here, the much decreased moisture quality out here. It'd be coming outflow dominant pretty darn quickly, and they'll become a squall line. You'd have to hope for kind of this easternmost cell, or this sort of southeasternmost cell or two, to kind of be semi-discrete and tap into that moisture in low-level jet. That would definitely have a tornado threat, I think, if it can stay discrete. But again, storm mode questions abound here. The HRRR V4, we'll see what that says. So here we have all that convection early morning and the afternoon on Saturday, tomorrow, and kind of the same thing. Very messy mode from the get-go. Outflow dominance definitely preferred here. You can tell by these models. This is a very strange progression here on the HRRR models. Let's look at the NamNest while we can. Don't really trust the NamNest that much. It's a pretty bad model, but it's showing more of the storms early on, Saturday morning and into the afternoon. We do get some discrete storms to fire out here in northwest Nebraska. That would be something to watch for sure if we can get storms out ahead of that, of the main sort of cluster. And they stay pretty semi-discrete through the evening. Then they kind of start to line out with an MCS that trails. Let's see. try to pick a sounding if we can't get it too contaminated out here ahead of those storms. And we'll see what it says. Because again, we saw on the regular NAM that the environment out ahead of these storms in the moisture axis was really, really, really good. So if we can get this to come to fruition, semi-discrete storms at the very least, they would definitely have a tornado threat. And very high spreads. Again, the farther south you go, the spreads are going to be much higher. So outflow dominance would probably be a worry there. Nice looping hodograph there at 22Z. And you can tell they kind of just get messy. Kind of an initial sort of bow. Those are interesting up in there. But again, it's the NAM nest. I don't ever put much faith into the NAM nest. It doesn't have a great handle on things usually. Usually it's either no convection or it's just a flat-out squall line. So I usually don't put too much faith in that model. Here is the WRF ARW. We'll go to the north central U.S. Let's see that sounding we pulled. That's not bad, but wouldn't put too much faith into that. A little bit capped there at the surface, so something to watch if that comes to fruition. If these storms, they would definitely be something to watch as well. All right, the ARW here. Let's go to the reflectivity and UH plot. All right. So we have those early day storms out here in eastern Wyoming, western Nebraska, and they continue. So these cams are showing that that's going to be the main storm. We're not really going to get anything to fire out here ahead of that in the better environment. So that's kind of unfortunate if these come to fruition. By the time they get into the better environment, they'll already be a very linear, very messy mode. So that is a little worrisome. Let's see what the Nissl WRF shows. Last cam we'll look at before we say goodbye here. Kind of the same. It does fire a discrete storm here in eastern Wyoming initially, but that would be in very poor thermodynamic environment. Let me zoom back in here, see if we can't get a sounding ahead of that storm. So there's our storm right there. I'm guessing the spreads would be pretty high. Yep, 85 over 57. Very high spreads there. So a little bit of concern tomorrow about storm mode. Storms becoming outflow dominant quickly and congealing pretty quickly. So once they hit the best moisture, they will be already in a squall line. But definitely, if there are any discrete storms remaining and they can tap into that air mass, definitely it is a pretty eye-opening parameter space, pretty significant parameter space there with large CAPE and very large looping hodographs. So that's it for Saturday. Sunday, again, more of the same. I think we'll definitely similar threats Sunday as there are Saturday. And then Monday down in the Central Plains, definitely something to watch as well. So we'll cut this off now. If you're chasing this weekend, stay safe. The Northern Plains are beautiful. South Dakota is beautiful. So enjoy. Hope you get to see some good stuff, and we will see you under the next mezzo. Thanks for watching.